Alright guys, today we got a unique Warhammer 40K story. It's gonna be narrated by Frederick Sure. I hope you guys enjoy it. Get cozy.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there are countless tales of heroism, horror, and the bizarre intersections of war that can only exist in the universe of Warhammer 40,000. But few scenarios capture the essence of this setting quite like the moment when a mob of orcs stumbles upon a dormant Black Templars dreadnought. It is a collision of two fundamentally opposed forces, a meeting between ancient, zealous righteousness, entombed in adamantium, and the crude, opportunistic brutality of the greenskin menace. What happens when unstoppable force meets immovable object? When savage curiosity encounters sacred machinery? When the galaxy's most destructive scavengers find one of humanity's most revered war engines in its state of eternal slumber? This is not simply a hypothetical exercise in tactics or technology. This scenario represents something deeper about the nature of Warhammer 40,000 itself, that endless war breeds endless complications, that even in sleep, the servants of the Emperor remain vigilant, and that the Orks, in all their brutal simplicity, can inadvertently stumble into situations far beyond their understanding. The discovery of a sleeping dreadnought by Orks is a scenario loaded with potential outcomes, each more violent than the last, yet tinged with that peculiar dark humor that only the greenskins can provide. To understand why this particular encounter is so significant, we must first appreciate what each element represents in the broader tapestry of 40,000's lore. A Black Templar's dreadnought is not merely a weapon or a vehicle. It is a tomb, a shrine, and a terrible angel of death all wrapped into one towering form. The Black Templars themselves are among the most zealous chapters of Space Marines in existence, crusading endlessly across the galaxy in the Emperor's name, accepting no deviation from their sacred duty, tolerating no failure in their pursuit of righteousness. Their dreadnoughts carry this zealotry forward beyond death itself. Ancient warriors who refused to accept the peace of the grave and instead chose to continue their eternal crusade within shells of ceramite and adamantium. On the other side of this equation stand the Orks, perhaps the most paradoxical faction in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. They are simultaneously the most dangerous and the most ridiculous threat the Imperium faces. They are creatures of pure violence, genetically engineered for war by ancient, long-dead masters. Yet they approach this violence with an almost childlike enthusiasm and creativity. Where humans see sacred technology, Orcs see shiny bits to be looted. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus perceives holy machine spirits, Orcs see something that might work better if they hit it with a wrench and painted it red. This fundamental disconnect in worldview is what makes any Orc encounter with Imperial technology fascinating. But when that technology happens to be a sleeping dreadnought, the potential for chaos multiplies exponentially. The Black Templars, zealots, beyond death. Before we can fully appreciate the horror and absurdity of Orcs discovering a dormant Black Templars dreadnought, we must understand the Black Templars themselves. This chapter stands apart, even among Space Marines, those already superhuman warriors of the Imperium. While other chapters might claim tactical flexibility or specialized warfare doctrines, the Black Templars claim something far more fundamental: unwavering, absolute faith in the God Emperor of mankind. The Black Templars were founded during the Second Founding, that great division of the Space Marine legions that followed the catastrophic Horus heresy. They are a successor chapter of the Imperial Fists, inheriting the stubborn determination and siege warfare expertise of their parent legion. But where the Imperial Fists eventually accepted the Codex Astartes and the limitations it imposed, the Black Templars chose a different path. Under the leadership of Sigismund, the first Emperor's champion and a warrior of legendary skill, they swore an oath that would define their chapter for the next 10,000 years. They would never cease their crusade against the enemies of mankind. This was not mere rhetoric or symbolic posturing. The Black Templars meant it literally. Since their founding, they have been on one continuous crusade, divided into numerous fleet-based crusade forces that roam the galaxy, seeking out threats to the Imperium. They maintain no fixed home world beyond their massive fleet fortresses. They recognize no end to their duty, save destruction at the hands of their enemies. They are perpetual warriors, forever seeking the next battle, the next opportunity to prove their devotion to the Emperor through violence and bloodshed. This zealotry extends to every aspect of Black Templars culture. Unlike many other Space Marine chapters, the Black Templars openly worship the Emperor as a god, rejecting the imperial truth that he was merely an exceptional man. They festoon their armor and weapons with chains, purity seals, and religious iconography. They maintain a unique command structure that eschews librarians entirely, viewing psychers with deep suspicion, even when those psychers are fellow Space Marines. They organize themselves into crusading forces rather than the standard company structure prescribed by the Codex Astartes. In every way, they have chosen to be different, to be more extreme, to embrace a form of warfare that is as much about religious devotion as it is about military effectiveness. When a Black Templar falls in battle, mortally wounded but not quite dead, the chapter faces a choice. For most warriors, even Space Marines, death would be the merciful option, a release from suffering and a passage to whatever afterlife awaits the faithful. But the Black Templars, in their wisdom and their cruelty, offer a different fate to their greatest heroes. They offer the opportunity to continue serving, to continue crusading, to continue killing in the Emperor's name, even when the flesh has failed. They offer interment in a Dreadnought. The Black Templars maintain a number of these ancient war machines, each one housing the shattered remains of a warrior who refused to accept death. Some of these Dreadnoughts are relatively recent additions, heroes of recent campaigns whose bodies were too broken to repair, but whose spirits burned too bright to extinguish. Others are ancient beyond reckoning, warriors who have served for centuries or even millennia, their memories of life before interment fading like mist, their personalities slowly subsumed by the machine they have become one with. Among the Black Templars, these Dreadnoughts are revered as living relics. They bear names that resonate through the chapter's history. Tancred, who served with distinction for centuries before finally finding peace in destruction. Gerald, who led the strike force known as Ansgar's Avengers during the Third War for Armageddon. Buckorath, a legendary chaplain Dreadnought, whose very presence inspired nearby brothers to greater acts of valor. These are not simply machines of war. They are monuments to devotion, examples of what it means to refuse to yield even when the body itself has been reduced to broken fragments kept alive by machines. The process of creating a Dreadnought is as much ritual as surgery. When a Black Templar is selected for this honor, or perhaps this curse, the chapter's apothecaries and tech marines work in concert to preserve what remains of the warrior's body. The shattered torso, the vital organs, most importantly the brain, these are harvested from the wreckage of flesh and bone and carefully installed within the armored sarcophagus that forms the heart of a Dreadnought. Tubes and cables connect the organic remains to the machine, creating a fusion of flesh and steel that defies natural law. The warrior's consciousness is hardwired directly into the Dreadnought's systems, their thoughts becoming commands, their will becoming movement, their fury becoming firepower. But this process comes with a terrible cost. The sensory deprivation is absolute and maddening. The warrior can no longer feel their body in any conventional sense. Instead, they perceive the world through optical sensors and Auspex arrays, their vision filtered through tactical displays and targeting algorithms. Sound comes to them as digital recordings processed through audio receptors. Touch is replaced by pressure readings on armor plating. They are simultaneously omnipresent within their mechanical shell and utterly absent from their own flesh. The psychological toll this takes cannot be overstated. Many Dreadnoughts, even among the zealous Black Templars, struggle with the isolation and the gradual erosion of their humanity. This is why Dreadnoughts spend most of their existence in stasis. Between battles, when their services are not required, they are placed in deep sleep, their consciousness suspended in a state that resembles death more than rest. In the depths of the chapter's fortress monasteries and fleet fortresses, in chambers specially sanctified for this purpose, rows of Dreadnought sarcophagi stand in silence, their occupants dreaming dreams that no living human could comprehend. Time passes differently for them. They might sleep for decades, between awakenings, or even centuries. When they wake, they often find that everyone they knew has long since died, that the world has changed in ways both subtle and profound, that they are strangers in an era they no longer recognize. For the Black Templars, this fate is considered a great honor. To be chosen for interment in a dreadnought is to be selected for immortality of a sort, a chance to serve the Emperor beyond the normal span of even a Space Marine's extended lifetime. But those who truly understand what it means, who have spoken with the Ancient Ones and heard the weariness in their mechanical voices, know that it is also a curse. It is an existence of endless war punctuated by void-like sleep, a slow erosion of self across centuries of service, a fate where one watches the universe age while remaining frozen in a moment of terrible transformation. The Black Templars' dreadnoughts embody all of this. They are walking contradictions, paragons of devotion, who are also prisoners of their own dedication. They are inspirational figures who are also cautionary tales. They are ancient wisdom wrapped in modern firepower, human souls bound within inhuman shells. And when one of these magnificent, terrible beings falls into stasis, when the systems that maintain their consciousness dim and they drift into that space between dreams and death, they become perhaps the most vulnerable they will ever be. They are immensely powerful war machines, rendered temporarily inert, valuable beyond measure, yet unable to defend themselves. This is the state in which Orks might find them. And that is when things become truly interesting. The mechanics of dreadnought stasis. To understand what happens when Orks encounter a sleeping dreadnought, we must first understand what that sleep actually entails. A dreadnought in stasis is not simply an inactive machine. It is a complex system of life support, neural interfaces, and preservation technology, all working in concert to maintain the fragile spark of life within its armored shell. The stasis systems employed by Space Marine chapters, including the Black Templars, are ancient technology dating back to the Dark Age of technology, or perhaps even earlier. These systems do not simply turn off the dreadnought's weapons and motors. Instead, they place the entire construct into a state of deep hibernation, slowing biological and mechanical processes to an absolute minimum. The amniotic fluid that fills the sarcophagus and the warrior's lungs is chilled to just above freezing. The neural interfaces that connect the brain to the dreadnought systems reduce their activity to barely perceptible levels. The life support systems shift into a maintenance mode, providing just enough oxygen and nutrients to keep the organic components alive without actually waking them. From the outside, a dreadnought in stasis appears completely inactive. The optical sensors are dark, their glowing red or green lenses dimmed to nothing. The weapons hang motionless, their targeting mechanisms offline. The power plant continues to hum at a low level, providing just enough energy to maintain the stasis systems, but the usual thunder of an active dreadnought is absent. The whole construct stands silent, a monument in metal, betraying no sign of the ancient warrior sleeping within. But appearances can be deceiving. Despite this seeming inactivity, a dreadnought in stasis is far from dead. The preservation systems are robust, designed to maintain the interred warrior for centuries or even millennia if necessary. The armor itself is thick enough to withstand tremendous punishment, layered ceramite plates that can shrug off even heavy weapons fire. The sarcophagus at the dreadnought's core is even more heavily armored, designed to protect its precious cargo from all but the most catastrophic damage. A dreadnought in stasis is not helpless, it is merely sleeping. Moreover, these systems are designed with certain safeguards. Significant disturbance, particularly violent impacts or attempts to breach the armor, can trigger automatic awakening protocols. The exact thresholds vary by pattern and chapter traditions, but generally speaking, if someone tries to forcibly dismantle a dreadnought or causes sufficient damage to its outer armor, the machine spirit will interpret this as an attack and begin emergency activation procedures. This process takes time, usually several minutes from initial disturbance to full operational status. But once begun, it is inexorable. The awakening process itself is a carefully orchestrated sequence. First, the stasis field collapses, and the life support systems begin cycling up to full power. The amniotic fluid is warmed and oxygenated. Chemical stimulants are injected into what remains of the warrior's bloodstream. The neural interfaces begin feeding sensory data back to the consciousness that has been dormant for weeks, months, years, or decades. This is not a gentle awakening. It is abrupt and disorienting, a violent return to consciousness from the void of deep sleep. For the warrior within, the experience is profoundly disturbing. Imagine sleeping for what feels like an instant but might have been years, then suddenly being thrust back into awareness with no context, no preparation, no gentle transition. The first sensations are always confusion and disorientation. Where am I? When is this? What is happening? Then comes the flood of tactical data. Visual feeds from multiple optical sensors, threat assessments, target lock indicators, ammunition counts, power level readings. It is overwhelming even for a space marine, even for a warrior who has experienced this process dozens or hundreds of times before. The Black Templars have their own traditions around awakening their dreadnoughts. Typically, a chaplain or tech marine will be present to guide the ancient warrior back to consciousness, to provide context and purpose, to remind them of their duty and their chapter. They speak litanies of activation, prayers to the Emperor and the machine spirit. Words meant to smooth the transition and focus the awakening warrior's mind. Without this guidance, an awakening dreadnought can be confused, disoriented, and extremely dangerous to anything in the vicinity. Now imagine this process triggered not by careful ritual and the presence of trusted battle brothers, but by a bunch of orcs hitting the dreadnought with hammers and trying to pry off its armor plates. Imagine the ancient warrior within, coming to consciousness not to the sound of familiar prayers, but to the guttural shouting of greenskins and the scrape of crude tools against sacred ceramite. Imagine the first visual data that fills their senses, showing not the familiar interior of a stasis chamber, but the ugly, brutal faces of orcs peering at them with curiosity and greed. This is the nightmare scenario for any dreadnought. To wake alone, surrounded by enemies, with no context and no support. For a Black Templar's dreadnought, raised in a culture of absolute devotion and righteous fury, this awakening would be even more jarring. The rage would be immediate and absolute. The response would be utterly devastating. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can understand the awakening, we must first understand the orcs, who would be foolish or curious enough to disturb one of these sleeping giants. The orc mentality: violence, curiosity, and loot. Orcs are, without question, the strangest and most paradoxical faction in all of Warhammer 40,000. They are simultaneously the most dangerous and the most comical threat the galaxy faces. Understanding them requires accepting several contradictions as simultaneously true. They are brutal killing machines who approach warfare with childlike glee. They are technologically sophisticated despite having no formal education or training. They can be individually stupid, yet collectively brilliant. They are the product of genetic engineering by ancient superintelligences, yet they live like barbaric tribes barely removed from Stone Age savagery. At the heart of the orc psyche is violence. They are literally built for war, their genetic code written by the mysterious Old Ones, or possibly their servitors, the Brain Boys, as weapons to fight in the war in heaven millions of years ago. Every aspect of orc biology serves this purpose. Their muscular frames grow stronger with age and combat experience. Their thick skulls can withstand impacts that would kill lesser beings. Their bodies heal with remarkable speed, and they can survive injuries that would be instantly fatal to humans. Even their psychology is geared toward conflict. Orcs are happiest when fighting. They derive genuine joy from violence. A good scrap, as they call it, is the pinnacle of orc existence. But this violence is not mindless or random. Orcs have a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of warfare, even if that understanding is expressed in crude and brutal ways. They understand tactics, at least in a rudimentary sense. They comprehend the value of numbers, of firepower, of momentum, They know that sometimes you need to hit things really hard, and sometimes you need to hit them repeatedly, and occasionally you need to sneak up and hit them when they are not looking. This is not formal military training. It is something deeper, something encoded in their very genes, instinctive knowledge that surfaces as they mature. Equally important to the orc psyche is their relationship with technology. Orcs are not natural engineers or inventors in the way humans understand those terms. They do not study physics or mathematics. They do not conduct experiments or draw up blueprints. Yet, they can build incredibly complex machines, can improvise repairs on the fly, can cobble together working weapons from literal scrap metal and spare parts. This is because of their techno-genes, genetic memories imprinted into certain orcs, particularly those known as mech boys, that give them an intuitive understanding of how machines work. This relationship with technology is fundamentally different from the human approach, where a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus sees sacred machinery that must be maintained through ritual and prayer. An orc mech boy sees something interesting that might work better if modified, where an imperial engineer would carefully follow ancient blueprints and establish procedures. An orc simply starts building, following instincts they do not fully understand themselves. The results are chaotic and unique, every orc weapon and vehicle slightly different from every other, yet somehow they function. Some of this is genuine engineering, crude but effective. Some of it is the orc gestalt psychic field making things work because enough orcs believe they should work. This brings us to one of the most defining characteristics of orc culture: looting. Orcs are compulsive scavengers, particularly those of the Death Skulls clan who have elevated looting to an art form. They see value where others see wreckage. A destroyed Imperial tank is not simply debris to be cleared from the battlefield. It is potential, raw materials waiting to be repurposed. The weapons still attached to that smoking wreck. They will work perfectly well once you detach them, give them a good whack with a hammer, and bolt them onto your own vehicle. The armor plating? Excellent for reinforcing your own equipment. Even the paint is worth scraping off and repurposing. This mentality extends to everything. Orcs will loot Leman Russ battle tanks and convert them into looted wagons, painting them in garish colors and festooning them with additional weapons that no human engineer would ever approve. They will strip crashed aircraft for parts. They will salvage Space Marine armor from fallen Astartes, though they can rarely use it properly given the size differential. They will even attempt to loot Titans given sufficient ambition and manpower. The famous greenskin legend of Grabber Gutsbag, a looter said to have successfully stolen Imperial Titans, speaks to this fundamental orc drive. If it exists and is not currently shooting at them, orcs will try to loot it. But looting is not simple theft or scavenging. It is an expression of orc creativity and their fundamental approach to problem solving. An orc does not see a machine as something sacred or unchangeable. They see it as something that can be improved, or at least made more orky. This is why looted vehicles invariably end up covered in additional weapons, extra armor plating, and bright paint jobs. The orcs are not just taking these things, they are making them better, at least by orc standards. The social hierarchy of orc society also plays a crucial role in understanding their behavior. Orcs are not egalitarian. The biggest, strongest, and most successful orcs dominate their smaller brethren through a combination of physical intimidation and demonstrated competence in battle. A war boss maintains his position not through elections or bloodline, but through raw power and the ability to lead his boys to good fights and plenty of loot. This creates a constant pressure to prove oneself, to show off, to demonstrate superiority over rivals. This competitive nature extends to looting. Finding and successfully claiming a valuable piece of technology is not just practical, it is a status symbol, proof of one's worth as an orc. The mech boy who manages to loot and repair a particularly impressive piece of Imperial tech gains respect from his peers. The war boss, whose forces strip an entire battlefield clean of valuable materials, demonstrates competence and provides for his warband. Younger orcs, those still relatively small and unproven, engage in looting partially to build up their own resources and partially to show that they are proper orcs who understand the value of a good bit of salvage. Crucially, orcs approach these activities with genuine enthusiasm. They are not grim scavengers picking over battlefield debris out of necessity. They enjoy looting. It is fun. Finding a particularly large gun or an intact vehicle chassis is exciting. Figuring out how to make it work is entertaining. The whole process of battlefield salvage is, to an orc, almost as enjoyable as the fighting itself, and in some cases more so because it involves less risk of getting hit. This combination of traits, the love of violence, the intuitive understanding of technology, the compulsive need to loot, the competitive drive to prove oneself, creates the perfect storm for what happens when orcs encounter a dormant dreadnought. They see something large, something clearly mechanical, something that looks valuable and impressive. Their first instinct is not fear or reverence. It is curiosity mixed with greed. What is this thing? Does it work? Can we take it? Can we use it? Can we improve it? These questions run through orc minds, such as they are, with remarkable speed, leading to decisions that more cautious races would consider suicidal. The Death Skulls, masters of salvage. While all orcs are natural scavengers to some degree, one clan stands above all others in their dedication to the art of looting: the Death Skulls. To understand what might happen when orcs find a sleeping dreadnought, we must pay special attention to this particular breed of greenskin, for they represent the pinnacle of orc salvage culture. The Death Skulls are instantly recognizable on any battlefield by their distinctive blue war paint and the skull emblems they favor. But what truly sets them apart is their philosophy regarding property and possession. To a Death Skull, the concept of ownership is remarkably fluid. What belongs to someone else today might belong to them tomorrow, assuming they can borrow it successfully. What was yours yesterday might be theirs today if you were not watching it carefully enough. This is not seen as theft within orc culture, at least not exactly. It is simply how things work among the Death Skulls. This clan's reputation among their fellow orcs is not particularly flattering. They are considered thieves and scavengers even by other greenskins, which is saying something given that most orcs have a fairly relaxed attitude toward property rights. The only clan viewed with greater suspicion are the Blood Axes, who are distrusted for their tendency to use tactics that other orcs consider un-orky, like retreat and subterfuge. The Death Skulls earn their questionable reputation honestly, through countless acts of petty theft, battlefield looting, and the mysterious disappearance of weapons and equipment whenever they are around. But what Death Skulls lack in trustworthiness, they more than make up for in technical aptitude and resourcefulness. Because they are constantly acquiring new equipment and materials, they have become extraordinarily skilled at repurposing technology from other races. A Death Skull mech boy is typically more experienced with non-orc technology than his counterparts from other clans, simply because he has handled more of it. They know which parts of an Imperial vehicle are useful and which can be discarded. They understand, in their intuitive, genetic memory way, how to adapt alien technology to orc purposes. The Death Skulls have elevated battlefield scavenging to something approaching an art form. They do not simply wait until after a battle to begin their salvage operations. They will start looting during the fighting itself if given half a chance. Groups of Death Skulls, often led by looters, those orcs who have made scavenging their primary occupation, will advance onto active battlefields with the express purpose of stripping anything valuable from the wreckage. They move with remarkable efficiency, their years of practice allowing them to quickly identify what is worth taking and what is simply worthless debris. This efficiency extends to their organization of looted materials. After a battle, when other clans might be celebrating or fighting among themselves, the Death Skulls go to work with almost methodical precision. They strip bodies, both orc and enemy. They salvage weapons, even those that appear badly damaged, knowing that a skilled mech can often restore function. They collect armor plates, ammunition, power cells, anything that might prove useful. Then comes the inevitable fighting, as Death Skulls argue over who found what first, who has the right to claim particularly valuable items, and what constitutes a fair trade for materials that multiple orcs want. The trading culture among Death Skulls is remarkably sophisticated by Orc standards. They will barter and auction their finds, trading lesser items for more valuable ones, or exchanging goods for teeth, the Orc currency made from their own teeth. This creates a sort of market economy within the warband, with certain Orcs becoming known as particularly shrewd traders, while others gain reputations as easy marks. Mech boys occupy a privileged position in this economy, as they can convert raw materials into functional equipment, essentially adding value to scrap and salvage. The Death Skulls' fixation on the color blue is another fascinating aspect of their culture. They believe, with the absolute certainty that only an Orc can muster, that blue is lucky. Therefore, they paint everything blue: themselves, their vehicles, their weapons, their armor, anything they can reach with a paintbrush or spray gun. And here is where the peculiar nature of Orc psychic fields becomes relevant. Because enough Death Skulls believe that blue is lucky, it actually provides some measure of protection. The greenskins covered in blue war paint do seem to survive situations that would kill other Orcs. Their blue-painted vehicles do seem to run a bit more smoothly and break down a bit less frequently. It is impossible to determine how much of this is genuine psychic effect and how much is confirmation bias, but Death Skulls are convinced of blue's protective properties. This belief in luck ties into their approach to looting. Death Skulls see valuable salvage as a sign of favor from their gods, Gork and Mork. Finding a particularly impressive piece of Imperial technology is not just good fortune, it is divine providence, proof that the Orc gods smile upon them. This religious dimension to looting makes them even more determined and persistent. They are not just scavengers, they are blessed by their deities with the ability to find and claim the best bits on the battlefield. Their vehicles reflect this philosophy. A Death Skull warband's motor pool is a bizarre collection of looted Imperial, Eldar, Tau, and even Chaos vehicles, all modified with Orc gubbins and painted in various shades of blue. Lehman Russ tanks with additional armor and oversized weapons. Rhinos converted into troop transports with their Imperial iconography crudely painted over. Predator tanks sporting Orc turrets and covered in random bits of scrap metal welded on for extra protection. Some Death Skulls have even managed to loot Eldar gravity tanks, though getting them to work properly often involves simply strapping wheels to them when the anti-gravity systems fail. The most ambitious Death Skulls set their sights on truly massive salvage projects. Imperial Knights, small Titans, even parts of larger Titans have been known to disappear when Death Skulls are in the area. The logistics of stealing something as large as a Titan are mind-boggling, requiring vast amounts of labor, substantial technical expertise, and tremendous audacity. Yet Death Skulls attempt it with surprising regularity. Sometimes they succeed, adding a looted Titan to their forces and gaining legendary status among their peers. More often they fail spectacularly, but the attempt itself is worth respect in Orc society. Now, imagine a mob of Death Skulls, fresh from a successful battle, or perhaps roaming through territory recently contested, encountering something they have never seen before, a dormant Dreadnought. Not a destroyed Dreadnought, which they have certainly encountered and looted before. Not an active Dreadnought, which they have fought and know to be extremely dangerous, but a sleeping one, standing motionless in some forgotten corner of a battlefield or abandoned facility, its systems dark, its weapons silent, appearing for all the world like a particularly large and valuable piece of salvage just waiting to be claimed. To a Death Skull, this would be an incredible find. Dreadnoughts are rare and valuable pieces of technology, revered even by the Imperium that builds them. The weapons alone would be worth a tremendous amount in trade. The armor could be repurposed to reinforce vehicles or bunkers. The power plant, if it could be removed without exploding, would be an incredible prize. Even the sarcophagus itself, that armored core where the entombed warrior sleeps, might have value, though what an Orc would do with it is unclear. The Death Skulls would see this opportunity, and their first instinct would be to claim it before anyone else did. They would approach cautiously, not out of fear, but out of a desire to assess what they had found. They would circle it, examining it from all angles, pointing out particularly interesting features to each other. They would debate among themselves, loudly and with much gesticulation, about how best to transport it, who saw it first, who gets the best bits once they dismantle it, and whether they should try to get it working first before taking it apart. And then, with the certainty of orcs who have successfully looted countless battlefields before this one, they would set to work. They would start trying to pry off armor plates. They would attempt to detach weapons. They would look for access panels and maintenance hatches. They would hit things with hammers, not out of anger or frustration, but simply because hitting things with hammers is how orcs solve most problems. They would do all of this with enthusiasm and confidence, certain that they are about to add an incredible prize to their collection. They would have no idea what they were about to wake up. The discovery. How orcs find a sleeping dreadnought. The circumstances under which orcs might discover a dormant dreadnought are varied, each scenario laden with its own particular elements of irony and impending catastrophe. The galaxy is vast, warfare is constant, and in the chaos of battle, even something as imposing and valuable as a space marine dreadnought can be lost, forgotten, or simply left behind due to tactical necessity. Understanding these scenarios helps us appreciate the full horror and dark comedy of what follows. One common scenario is the aftermath of a major engagement. Picture a battlefield stretching across kilometers of devastated terrain. Trenches and bunkers lie shattered. Vehicles burn or sit as abandoned husks. The dead lie where they fell, human and alien alike, slowly being buried under the dust and debris of war. In the confusion of a large-scale retreat or redeployment, a dreadnought might be left behind, perhaps damaged but still functional, its pilot placed into stasis to await recovery. The Imperium, despite its vast resources, is not always able to recover everything in the chaos of war. Sometimes tactical situations demand immediate withdrawal, leaving valuable equipment behind, with plans to return and salvage it later. Sometimes those plans never come to fruition. Days, weeks, or even months after the original battle, orcs arrive. Perhaps they are following the scent of previous combat, drawn by that peculiar greenskin instinct that leads them toward places where fighting occurred. Perhaps they are simply passing through the area on their way to somewhere else. Or perhaps they have decided to occupy this particular piece of territory for reasons only orcs could articulate. Regardless of their motivation, they spread out across the battlefield, doing what orcs do best, looking for anything useful to loot. Most of what they find is standard battlefield debris, destroyed vehicles, spent ammunition casings, blast craters, the usual detritus of war. But then, half buried in rubble, or standing in what was once a defensive position, one of them spots something extraordinary. It is large, man-shaped but towering, heavily armored, adorned with purity seals and religious iconography, its weapons clearly of space marine manufacture. To anyone with proper understanding, it would be obviously a dreadnought, a sacred war engine of the Adeptus Astartes. To the orcs, it is the most interesting bit of salvage they have ever seen. Another scenario involves abandoned Imperial facilities. The Imperium maintains countless installations across the galaxy: fortresses, monitoring stations, supply depots, chapter keeps, reliquaries. During extended campaigns or in the face of overwhelming enemy forces, these facilities are sometimes evacuated. The personnel withdraw, taking what they can carry, destroying what they cannot allow to fall into enemy hands, and leaving behind anything too large or too difficult to move in the time available. This category can include dreadnoughts, particularly if they are in deep stasis and cannot be quickly awakened. When orcs later occupy such a facility, they find a treasure trove of Imperial technology. Most of it is either destroyed or heavily damaged by the retreating defenders, but not everything can be demolished in the time available. Deep in the heart of a fortress monastery, in chambers specifically designed for housing sleeping dreadnoughts, the orcs might discover their prize. These chambers are usually sealed, protected by heavy blast doors and locking mechanisms meant to keep unauthorized personnel out. But orcs are remarkably good at breaking through barriers, particularly when they suspect something valuable lies on the other side. The doors yield to Ork determination, whether through brute force, lucky application of looted explosives, or the work of a particularly skilled mech boy with his tools. Inside, the Orks find what appears to be a shrine. The chamber is usually decorated with religious iconography, hung with chains and purity seals, its walls carved with litanies of hate against the enemies of mankind. Power cables run across the ceiling, feeding into stasis systems that hum quietly in the darkness. And there, standing in alcoves or secured in docking stations, are the Dreadnoughts themselves. To the Orks, this is a magnificent find. These are clearly important machines, kept in a special place, surrounded by what appears to be religious reverence. In Ork logic, this means they must be particularly valuable and powerful. The fact that they are currently inactive does not diminish their worth. If anything, it makes them easier to claim. The Orks spread out, examining their finds with mounting excitement, already planning what they will do with such incredible salvage. A third scenario, perhaps the most tragic from an Imperial perspective, involves space hulks and lost ships. The warp is treacherous, and ships sometimes disappear into its depths, only to re-emerge centuries or even millennia later as parts of space hulks. Those vast conglomerations of vessels fused together by warp energies and drifting through real space like malignant tumors. Orks love space hulks, seeing them as massive gifts from their gods, filled with useful scrap, interesting technology, and opportunities for good fights. When Orks board a space hulk containing Imperial vessels, particularly Space Marine strike cruisers or battle barges, they sometimes discover dreadnoughts in the ship's armories or stasis chambers. These ancient warriors have been sleeping for an unknown length of time, their ships lost in the warp, their chapter perhaps destroyed or scattered, their very existence forgotten by everyone except themselves and the machine spirits that maintain them. The Orks have no context for what they have found, no understanding of the tragedy and horror represented by these sleeping figures. They see only interesting technology in an unexpected place. In some cases, the discovery is almost accidental. Perhaps a mob of Orks is simply moving through an area, unaware that an Imperial force was recently present. They come around a corner, through a door, over a ridge, and there it stands, a dreadnought, motionless, its pilot in stasis, awaiting pickup that has not yet arrived. Perhaps a tactical withdrawal was conducted so hastily that this ancient warrior was left behind, his brothers expecting to return for him shortly. Perhaps communication failures mean that no one knows he is here. Perhaps this particular dreadnought has been standing in this spot for weeks or months, patiently waiting in mechanical sleep for someone to wake him and give him purpose again. The Orks stop, surprised by the sudden appearance of what is clearly a valuable piece of machinery. For a moment, there is silence as they process what they are seeing. Then, with typical Ork pragmatism, they decide this must be their lucky day and proceed to claim their unexpected prize. Regardless of the specific circumstances, certain elements remain consistent across all these scenarios. The Orks are surprised but pleased by their discovery. They recognize that what they have found is Imperial technology of significant sophistication and value. They have absolutely no understanding of what a dreadnought actually is or what is inside it, and they are completely unprepared for what happens when they start trying to dismantle it. The initial approach is usually cautious, at least by Ork standards. They circle the dormant machine, examining it from various angles, pointing out features to each other. The weapons attract immediate attention. Those are clearly guns of some sort, and Orks can always use more guns. The armor plating also draws interest. It is clearly high quality, thick ceramite that could be repurposed for dozens of uses. Some of the Orks might notice the purity seals and religious iconography covering the dreadnought's chassis, though they are unlikely to understand what these represent beyond human decorations. If a mech boy is present, and there usually is in any sizable Ork mob, he pushes to the front to conduct a more detailed examination. His practiced eye, guided by genetic memories and years of experience looting battlefields, quickly identifies the dreadnought as something special. This is not just any vehicle or random piece of machinery. This is sophisticated, well-maintained, clearly important technology. The mech's mind immediately begins racing with possibilities. What kind of power source does this thing use? How are those weapons mounted? Can those systems be adapted for Ork use? What would it take to get this thing moving? The other Orks grow impatient with the mech's examination. They want to start taking this thing apart, claiming the best bits before someone else shows up and tries to steal their find. Arguments break out about who saw it first, who has the right to the various components, whether they should try to take it apart here or drag it back to their base whole. This is standard Ork behavior when confronted with valuable salvage. Excitement mixed with greed, mixed with the constant jockeying for position that characterizes Ork social interactions. Eventually, someone makes a decision, probably the largest Ork present or whoever gets tired of arguing first. They are going to claim this prize. Time to start taking it apart. Tools appear: wrenches, cutting torches, hammers, power claws, anything that might help dismantle the Dreadnought and extract its valuable components. The Orks spread out around the machine, each one picking a particular part that interests them, and they get to work. This is where things start to go wrong. The first attempts to remove armor plates meet with frustration. The ceramite is thick and well secured, bolted and welded in place with craft that far exceeds typical Ork construction. But Orks are persistent, and they keep trying. They find seams between plates and attempt to pry them apart. They locate bolts and try to loosen them, usually by hitting them with hammers. They look for access panels that might allow them to reach the internal components more easily. The mechboy might notice that the machine is not entirely inactive. There is a low hum of power, barely perceptible, suggesting that some systems remain online even though the main weapons and motors are clearly shut down. A more knowledgeable observer might recognize this as a warning sign, an indication that the Dreadnought is in standby mode rather than truly deactivated. But mechboys, while clever, lack formal education in Imperial technology, and their understanding is intuitive rather than theoretical. The mech might note the power reading as interesting without understanding its significance. Then someone, perhaps trying to detach one of the weapons or attempting to pry open what they think is an access panel, does something that triggers the Dreadnought's automated defenses. Maybe they cut through a data cable. Maybe they breach a pressure seal on the sarcophagus. Maybe they simply cause enough physical damage that the machine spirit interprets it as an attack. Regardless of the specific cause, the result is the same. The Dreadnought begins to wake up. When the ancient stirs. The awakening process. The first sign that something has changed is subtle enough that the Orks might not immediately notice it. Deep within the Dreadnought's chassis, systems that have been dormant for hours, days, weeks, or even longer suddenly begin to activate. Power cells that have been in minimal output mode surge to full capacity. The life support system, which has been maintaining the entombed warrior in deep stasis, begins cycling up to normal operational parameters. Chemical injectors, positioned at precise points around what remains of the warrior's body, begin dispensing stimulants into the bloodstream, forcing consciousness to return. The hum of power that the mechboy noticed intensifies, becoming a throaty growl as the Dreadnought's power plant spins up. Coolant begins flowing through lines that have been still. Hydraulic systems pressurize. The amniotic fluid that fills the sarcophagus and the warrior's lungs begins to warm from its stasis temperature of just above freezing to something approaching body temperature. Inside the armored core of the machine, in the darkness of the sarcophagus, chemical reactions begin to reverse the deep sleep that has preserved the occupant. The Orks, initially, might not realize what is happening. They are focused on their task, working to dismantle this valuable find, arguing among themselves about who gets what pieces. The increasing mechanical sounds might simply seem like the normal noise of Orks working with tools and machinery, but then other signs appear, harder to ignore. The optical sensors, previously dark, begin to glow, a faint red light at first, barely noticeable in whatever ambient illumination exists, then growing stronger, brighter, until anyone looking at the Dreadnought's face can see the angry crimson glow of its visual sensors powering up. The weapons, which have been hanging loosely, begin to move slightly as their targeting mechanisms come online and run self-diagnostics. Small motors whir, servos adjust. The entire machine, which had been completely still, begins to exhibit signs of life. Some of the orcs notice these changes and pause in their work. The smarter ones, or at least the more experienced ones, might begin to feel the first inklings of concern. This thing is turning on. That might be a problem. The mech boy definitely notices, his genetically imprinted understanding of machinery telling him that whatever they have done has triggered some kind of automated activation sequence. He might try to warn the others, though whether they listen depends on their respect for him and how excited they are about looting. Inside the sarcophagus, the warrior begins the slow, agonizing process of returning to consciousness. For a space marine entombed in a dreadnought, awakening is always a traumatic experience, no matter how many times they have gone through it. The transition from the void of deep sleep to full awareness is violent and disorienting. The first sensation is usually pain, as nerves that have been essentially frozen are stimulated back to function. Then comes the flood of chemical stimulants, forcing synapses to fire that have been dormant, shocking the brain back into activity. The warrior's first thoughts are confused, fragmented. They try to remember where they are, when they are, what is happening. Memories are sluggish, thoughts struggling to cohere. How long has it been since last they were awake? Hours? Days? Decades? There is no way to immediately know. The disorientation is profound, made worse by the complete sensory deprivation that accompanies stasis. They try to move, and cannot, at least not in the way they remember moving. Their body does not respond. Because their body, as they once knew it, no longer exists in any meaningful sense. Then the neural interfaces begin feeding data directly into their consciousness. At first it is overwhelming, raw sensory input pouring in faster than their awakening mind can process. Visual feeds from multiple optical sensors, showing fragmented images that their brain struggles to assemble into coherent pictures. Audio input, sounds that seem impossibly loud after the silence of stasis. Pressure sensors across the Dreadnought's chassis, reporting the status of the armor and registering the presence of multiple contacts. Things touching the hull, moving around the exterior. Gradually, as seconds that feel like hours pass, the warrior's consciousness begins to catch up with the flood of input. Their training, etched into their psyche across years of service as a space marine and reinforced through countless awakenings as a dreadnought, helps them process the information. They begin to understand what they are seeing and hearing. They start to remember their situation, to recall that they are no longer flesh and blood, but rather consciousness bound within a machine. And then, as their awareness sharpens, they begin to understand what is happening. There are xenos around them. They can hear the guttural voices, see the crude green forms moving around their chassis, feel the impacts of tools against their armor. They have been discovered by enemies. Worse, these enemies are trying to dismantle them. The rage that follows this realization is immediate and absolute. For a Black Templar's dreadnought specifically, this rage is amplified by their chapter's particular zealotry. A Black Templar does not simply hate their enemies in an abstract sense. They hate them with burning, righteous fury, viewing every Xeno, every heretic, every threat to mankind as an affront to the God Emperor himself. To wake and find oneself surrounded by orcs, to realize that these creatures have been touching the sacred machinery of your tomb, to understand that they intended to tear you apart for salvage. This is an insult beyond measure. The Black Templar's dreadnought does not calculate odds or assess the tactical situation with cool rationality. They do not pause to consider their options. They react with pure, volcanic wrath. The warrior's mind, now fully active, interfaces with the dreadnought systems, and those systems respond. Where moments before there were clumsy attempts at movement as automated diagnostics ran their course, now there is purpose and direction. The dreadnought's limbs move with sudden coordination. Its weapons rotate toward targets. Its targeting systems lock onto the multiple life signs registered around its position. The machine spirit, which has been waiting patiently for its partner to wake, rejoices at the return of consciousness and stands ready to serve. The optical sensors, now fully active, focus on the scene before them. The Black Templars warrior sees orcs, dozens of them perhaps, spread out around their chassis, some still working with tools, others beginning to back away as they realize something has changed. The warrior recognizes them instantly, genetic memory and countless battles providing immediate identification. Greenskins, Xenos, enemies of mankind, things to be destroyed without mercy or hesitation. In the fraction of a second between full awareness and action, the warrior makes no complex tactical calculations. There is no consideration of withdrawal or negotiation. The response is immediate and unambiguous. Kill them all, every single one. Let none survive to report what they found here. Purge this place of their taint. Such is the way of the Black Templars, and such is the fury of an ancient warrior woken by enemies who dared to lay hands upon their sacred form. What happens next is not a battle. It is an execution. The Orks, who moments ago were gleefully planning how to divide up their salvage, suddenly find themselves in the presence of something they were completely unprepared for. The massive war machine they were casually dismantling is not salvage at all. It is a weapon, and it has just decided they need to die. The fury of the ancient. When metal wakes to war, the transformation from dormant hulk to active war machine takes seconds, but to the orcs surrounding the Dreadnought, those seconds stretch into a nightmare of realization. The optical sensors blaze with light. The weapons, which had been hanging loosely, suddenly snap into firing positions with mechanical precision. The entire chassis, which had been still as a statue, explodes into motion. And then, in a voice that seems to emerge from the machine itself, crackling through ancient Vox speakers, with centuries of accumulated damage and modifications, the entombed warrior speaks. What the Black Templars' Dreadnought says in this moment depends on countless factors. The individual warrior's personality, how long they have been asleep, what they remember of their last awakening, the specific situation they have found themselves in. But the sentiment is always the same, expressed through litanies of hate that the Black Templars have refined across 10,000 years of constant warfare. It might be a formal declaration, drawing on the chapter's many catechisms of battle. It might be a simple, rage-filled roar. It might be words in High Gothic, the language of the Imperium, which the Orks would not understand but whose fury would be unmistakable. For the Emperor and Dawn, death to the Xenos. By the throne, you shall be purged. I am his will made manifest. Die, greenskin filth. The Orks have perhaps a moment to react to this declaration before the killing begins. The smarter ones, those with experience fighting space marines, might realize immediately how much trouble they are in. They have angered something ancient and powerful, something they are not equipped to fight. The less experienced Orks, and there are always plenty of those, might still think this is just another scrap, just a particularly big opponent that will require more hitting than usual. Both groups are wrong about what is about to happen. A Black Templar's Dreadnought is not simply a large opponent. It is a mobile fortress, a walking weapons platform that combines the firepower of a light tank with the mobility of infantry and the targeting precision that only a veteran warrior with centuries of experience can provide. The specific loadout varies. Dreadnoughts can be equipped with different combinations of weapons depending on their role and the chapter's available armory, but all of them are devastating. The most common configuration includes an assault cannon or autocannon as a primary ranged weapon, capable of spewing hundreds of rounds per minute, each one explosive and armor-piercing. In close combat, a power fist or Dreadnought close combat weapon provides crushing force, able to tear through armor plating like paper and reduce orcs to pulp with single blows. Some Dreadnoughts mount missile launchers, heavy flamers, or plasma cannons. All of them are far more than a standard mob of orcs is prepared to handle. The assault cannon speaks first, its barrels spinning up with a distinctive whine before unleashing a torrent of fire. At point-blank range, against unarmored or lightly armored targets like most orcs, the effect is catastrophic. The first burst might kill 5 or 6 greenskins, their bodies literally torn apart by explosive shells moving at supersonic velocity. The Dreadnought's targeting systems, guided by centuries of combat experience, track from one target to the next with inhuman precision. Each burst lasts only seconds, but in those seconds, Orks die. The greenskins' natural toughness, that remarkable resilience that allows them to survive wounds that would kill lesser beings, counts for nothing against this level of firepower. A single hit from an assault cannon shell can remove limbs or blow massive holes through torsos. The Orks do not die quietly or gracefully. They are torn apart, their blood and bits of their bodies spraying across the surrounding area, painting the ground and anything nearby in green ichor. Those Orks who survive the initial burst of fire react according to their nature. Some charge forward, roaring battle cries, hoping to close the distance and engage in melee where their choppers and crude weapons might have some effect. Others attempt to return fire with their own shooters and sluggers, their bullets sparking off the Dreadnought's thick armor with no appreciable effect. A few, those with enough sense to recognize a fight they cannot win, turn and run, hoping to escape this metal monster that has awakened among them. None of these responses are particularly effective. The Orks who charge forward find themselves facing the Dreadnought's close combat weapon. A power fist, or Dreadnought close combat weapon, is a massive gauntlet lined with adamantium talons and powered by energy fields that disrupt molecular bonds on contact. When such a weapon strikes an Ork, even a large one, the result is immediate and final. Bodies are crushed, bones shattered, organs pulped. A single backhand swing can kill multiple Orks if they are standing close together. The Dreadnought does not need to be particularly skillful or precise in close combat. The sheer mass and power of its blows are sufficient to destroy anything that gets within reach. The Orks attempting to shoot back quickly discover that their weapons are utterly inadequate for this task. Shooter and slugger fire might kill a human, might even wound a space marine if enough rounds find gaps in the power armor, but against a Dreadnought's thick ceramite plating, they are useless. The bullets ricochet, leaving barely noticeable scratches. Even the heavier weapons some Orks might be carrying, rockets or big shooters, struggle to penetrate the armor. A lucky shot might damage a sensor or scratch the paintwork, but meaningful harm requires sustained, focused fire from much heavier weapons than a typical mob of Orks carries. The running Orks face perhaps the worst fate of all. The Black Templars are not a chapter that accepts enemies fleeing from battle. They are zealots who believe that every Xeno, every heretic, every enemy of mankind must be destroyed utterly, with no thought given to mercy or quarter. The Dreadnought turns its attention to the fleeing greenskins, tracking them with its optical sensors, calculating lead angles, and firing solutions with the precision of a machine and the experience of centuries. The assault cannon speaks again, cutting down the runners, leaving their corpses scattered across whatever ground they managed to cover before death found them. In less than a minute, the fight is effectively over. The Orks who charged are dead, their bodies crushed or torn apart. The ones who stood and fought are dead, cut down by overwhelming firepower. The ones who ran are dead, killed before they could reach safety. What moments ago was a mob of greenskins, excited about their salvage find, has been reduced to scattered corpses and green bloodstains. The Dreadnought stands among the carnage, its weapons still hot from firing, its systems running through post-combat diagnostics and threat assessments. The entombed warrior's rage begins to subside, replaced by other considerations. Where is this? When is this? How did this happen? What should be done now? But before any of these questions can be addressed, the warrior must deal with immediate concerns. Are there more enemies nearby? Is extraction possible? What is the status of the surrounding area? The Dreadnought's sensors sweep the vicinity, searching for additional threats, identifying terrain features, attempting to establish their current location and situation. If this confrontation occurred near an active war zone, the sounds of battle will have attracted attention. Other Orks, hearing the distinctive thunder of an assault cannon and the roars of their dying comrades, will investigate. Or perhaps Imperial forces, if any are in the area, will recognize the sound of Space Marine weapons and come to assist. The minutes following the initial confrontation are crucial. Determining whether the Dreadnought will be recovered by friendly forces, must fight its way to safety, or will be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. If the awakening occurred in a more isolated location, the Dreadnought faces different challenges. Without immediate support, without clear understanding of the local situation, the ancient warrior must make decisions based on incomplete information. Do they attempt to reach Imperial lines? Do they secure a defensive position and wait for rescue? Do they continue their mission, whatever it was, before they entered stasis? The answers depend on the individual warrior's judgment, their chapter's doctrines, and the specific circumstances they find themselves in. But regardless of what comes next, one thing is certain. The Orks who thought they had found valuable salvage instead found something far more dangerous. They discovered that even in sleep, the warriors of the Emperor remain deadly. They learned, in the last moments of their lives, why the Adeptus Astartes are feared throughout the galaxy. They experienced firsthand what happens when you disturb something that should have been left alone. This is the dark comedy and grim horror of Warhammer 40,000 distilled into a single scenario. The Orks, approaching everything with their mixture of enthusiasm and ignorance, thinking they have found treasure, instead wake a nightmare. The Black Templars' Dreadnought, robbed of even the questionable rest that stasis provides, forced to wake among enemies, responds with the only thing it knows: overwhelming, righteous violence. Neither side understands the other, neither side shows mercy, and in the end, only corpses and the ancient war machine remain, testament to the fundamental truth of this universe. There is only war. Different Ork responses. Not all greenskins are equal. While the scenario we have described represents perhaps the most straightforward outcome, when Orks discover a sleeping Dreadnought and promptly wake it up through their fumbling attempts at salvage, the actual range of possible Ork responses is more varied than one might expect. Orks are not entirely uniform in their behavior or capabilities, and the presence of certain specialists or particularly intelligent individuals can dramatically change how this encounter unfolds. Consider what happens when a particularly experienced mech boy is leading the group that makes the discovery. A veteran mech, one who has successfully looted and repurposed Imperial technology dozens or hundreds of times, brings knowledge and caution that typical Orks lack. Such a mech might recognize a Dreadnought for what it is, not through formal education but through accumulated experience. He has seen Space Marine war machines before. He knows they are dangerous, even when inactive. He understands that Imperial technology, particularly sophisticated Imperial technology, often has safeguards and automated defenses. This mech approaches the dormant Dreadnought differently than less experienced Orks would. Instead of immediately trying to dismantle it, he conducts a more thorough examination. He identifies power cables and data lines, tracing them to understand how the machine is powered and controlled. He looks for control interfaces, access panels that might allow him to interact with the Dreadnought systems rather than simply tearing them apart. He might attempt to isolate and disconnect the power supply before doing anything else, hoping to ensure the machine cannot activate while he works on it. Whether this approach succeeds depends on numerous factors. Dreadnought technology is far more sophisticated than most things an Ork mech typically encounters. The power systems are redundant and protected, designed specifically to prevent enemies from easily disabling the machine. The stasis systems might have fail-safes that trigger if someone tries to tamper with them improperly. But mech boys have that peculiar combination of genetic knowledge, practical experience, and psychic belief that makes them capable of remarkable technical feats when circumstances align properly. In the best case, from the Ork's perspective, the mech successfully disables the power supply before the Dreadnought can wake. He disconnects critical systems, ensuring that even if his other attempts at salvage trigger activation protocols, there is not enough power available for the ancient warrior to fully rouse. The mob then dismantles the Dreadnought at their leisure, claiming its weapons, armor, and other valuable components without triggering the catastrophe that normally results from disturbing a sleeping giant. This outcome, while possible, is relatively rare. More commonly, even experienced mechs underestimate the complexity of Dreadnought systems. They might successfully disable some subsystems while accidentally triggering others. They might cut what they think is a power line only to discover they have severed a coolant loop, causing other systems to overload and activate emergency protocols. Ork technical skill, while impressive in its own way, is not precise or systematic in the manner of Adeptus Mechanicus engineering. Mistakes happen, and those mistakes have consequences. Another variable is the presence of larger, smarter orcs in the group. A warboss, or big mech, brings not just physical power, but also judgment and authority. Such leaders have survived and thrived in orc society precisely because they make better decisions than their smaller counterparts. They have seen enough combat to recognize when something is too dangerous to mess with, or at least to approach with appropriate caution. A warboss examining a dormant dreadnought might decide that while the salvage is tempting, the risk of waking it is too great. He might order his boys to leave it alone, or to approach it with more care than they would normally exercise. This decision might not sit well with the rest of the mob, particularly those looters who are already imagining what they could trade for pieces of a dreadnought. But a warboss's word is law among orcs, backed by physical prowess and demonstrated competence in battle. Alternatively, the warboss might see the dormant dreadnought as a challenge, a test of his mob's strength and cunning. Instead of trying to dismantle it for salvage, he might deliberately wake it for the express purpose of fighting it. This is not stupidity, at least not entirely. It is orc logic taken to its ultimate conclusion. The best way to prove your strength is to fight strong opponents. What better opponent than a Space Marine dreadnought? Sure, some boys will die in the fight, but that is what boys are for, and the survivors will have a magnificent story to tell. The warboss, who leads his mob in successfully destroying an awakened dreadnought, gains tremendous prestige, his reputation enhanced by the difficulty of the achievement. The composition of the orc mob also matters significantly. A group consisting primarily of looters, those orcs who have specialized in scavenging and carrying heavy weapons, approaches the situation differently than a mob of standard boys or a group of vehicle-obsessed speed freaks. Looters have more experience with Imperial technology and might recognize the dreadnought's weapons as particularly valuable prizes. They also tend to be slightly more patient than typical orcs, willing to spend time carefully removing valuable components rather than simply smashing everything and taking what survives. Speed freaks, on the other hand, might be primarily interested in whether the dreadnought's legs can be repurposed into some kind of vehicle, or whether its power plant could be used to boost one of their existing rides. Blood Axes, the sneakiest of orc clans, might try to steal the entire dreadnought without waking it, viewing this as the ultimate test of their skill. Goths, the most fightiest of orcs, might deliberately wake it just for the opportunity to test themselves against such a powerful opponent. There is also the question of timing and circumstances. Orcs who discover a dormant dreadnought while under time pressure behave differently than those with unlimited leisure to examine their find. If the mob is being pursued by enemies, or racing to reach an objective, or operating under orders from a larger force, they might make hasty decisions that differ from what they would do with more time to consider options. Conversely, orcs who have secured an area and have time to work methodically might take a more careful approach to their salvage operations. The condition of the dreadnought itself influences orc behavior as well. A pristine dreadnought, clearly well maintained and fully functional, looks valuable and might inspire more greed and less caution. A dreadnought that shows visible battle damage, with scorched armor or missing components, might seem less impressive and therefore worth less effort to carefully salvage. Ironically, a damaged dreadnought might actually be safer from the orc's perspective, as battle damage might have already disabled some of the automated systems that would normally trigger awakening protocols. One fascinating variant scenario involves the orcs successfully waking the dreadnought, but then managing to restrain or contain it before it can effectively fight back. This requires a combination of luck, numbers, and the right equipment. If the orcs happen to have heavy chains, construction equipment, or similar materials available, and if they react quickly enough to the dreadnought's activation, they might manage to immobilize it before it can bring its weapons to bear. This is extraordinarily difficult, like trying to chain an angry god. But orcs sometimes accomplish extraordinary things through sheer audacity and numbers. A successfully restrained Dreadnought presents the orcs with an interesting problem. They have captured something incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous. The entombed warrior is conscious and furious, probably screaming threats and litanies of hate through the Vox speakers. The Dreadnought is struggling against its restraints. Powerful servos straining, metal groaning. The orcs must decide quickly what to do with their prize before it breaks free, or before the noise attracts unwanted attention from other Imperial forces. Some orcs might see this as an opportunity to prove their toughness by fighting the Dreadnought in a more controlled setting, perhaps as entertainment or as a test for aspiring warriors. Others might try to transport it back to their base, imagining the praise and rewards they would receive for delivering such a prize to their warboss. The most ambitious mech boys might see this as a chance to study living space marine technology up close, to understand how these machines work and potentially learn secrets that could be applied to orc constructions. All of these scenarios involve significant risks. A restrained Dreadnought is still dangerous. Its weapons can still fire, even if its movement is restricted, and its occupant is certainly broadcasting distress signals if any Imperial forces are in range to receive them. Moreover, Dreadnoughts are tough. Breaking free from restraints designed to hold normal vehicles is well within their capabilities, given time. The Orks might find that their prize is more trouble than anticipated, particularly when the Black Templars send a retrieval force to recover their ancient brother. Finally, there is the darkly humorous possibility that the Orks successfully loot the Dreadnought, somehow avoid waking it during the process, and incorporate its parts into their own constructions without ever understanding what they had. The weapons end up mounted on a battle wagon. The armor plates become additional protection for a mech's workshop. The power plant gets wired into some ramshackle creation. The sarcophagus itself, that sacred tomb containing the remains of a space marine hero, might be discarded as not useful or repurposed as a storage container. In this scenario, the entombed warrior might never wake at all, or might wake years later, in circumstances so bizarre that even their centuries of experience provide no frame of reference. Imagine the horror of a Black Templar's ancient consciousness, a warrior who has served for hundreds of years, fighting in 1,000 battles, watching generations of brothers live and die, waking to discover that they are now part of some orc monstrosity, their sacred tomb defiled beyond recognition, their weapons firing in the service of the very Xenos they have spent lifetimes destroying. This is perhaps the most grimdark outcome of all, worse than death in battle, worse even than capture, a fate so terrible that it represents everything the Black Templars fight against: the desecration of the holy, the triumph of Xenos, the perversion of the Emperor's works. Yet, in the vast, uncaring universe of Warhammer 40,000, such fates are not only possible, but perhaps inevitable, given sufficient time and opportunity. Historical context. When these encounters have occurred. While the specific scenario of Orks discovering and disturbing a sleeping Black Templar's Dreadnought might seem like a hypothetical exercise, the broader context of Black Templars fighting Orks and Dreadnoughts being lost or isolated in combat zones is well documented throughout Imperial history. These encounters provide context for understanding how such situations develop and what consequences they have. The Third War for Armageddon, which began in the year 998, M41, provides perhaps the most relevant historical framework. This massive conflict pitted the largest Orc invasion force seen in millennia against the combined might of the Imperium, with the Black Templars playing a significant role in the defense. High Marshal Helbrecht brought 3 full crusades to Armageddon, representing a substantial commitment of the chapter's strength, and the Black Templars fought in both the ground campaigns and the orbital battles that characterized this war. The Battle of Hellsreach, a sub-campaign within the larger war, saw Black Templars fighting alongside Imperial Guard regiments, Sisters of Battle, and Titan legions against overwhelming Orc numbers. Reclusiarch Grimaldus, and approximately 100 Black Templars were tasked with defending the vital industrial port city of Helsreach from the Greenskin tide. The fighting was brutal, prolonged, and desperate, with the defenders eventually forced back into the city's inner districts before managing to hold until reinforcements arrived. In this environment, with battles raging across multiple fronts simultaneously, with Imperial forces frequently forced to withdraw or reposition under pressure, it is entirely plausible that dreadnoughts might be left behind, their pilots placed in emergency stasis, with plans to recover them when the tactical situation allowed. Not all such recovery operations would succeed. Some might be delayed by continuing combat. Others might be forgotten in the chaos of a massive, multi-year campaign. Ork forces advancing into areas where fighting had recently occurred would encounter these abandoned war machines, leading to exactly the kind of scenarios we have been discussing. The Solemnus Crusade, another Black Templars operation that intersected with the Armageddon campaigns, pursued the Ork warboss Morkrul Grimskar into the planet's equatorial jungle. During these operations, the Crusade's forces encountered numerous challenges, including not only Orks, but also Chaos forces that had emerged from ancient warp gates. The complex, multi-faction nature of the fighting, with battles occurring in difficult terrain and under confused circumstances, created ideal conditions for equipment to be lost or isolated. We know from official records that the Black Templars' Dreadnought Gerald led a strike force called Ansgar's Avengers during these campaigns. The mission of this force was to locate and recover the Emperor's champion Ansgar, who had been captured by Morkrul Grimskar after the warboss had been transformed into a cyborg, using looted Black Templars wargear. This last detail is particularly relevant. Orks successfully looting Space Marine equipment, including potentially components from destroyed or damaged dreadnoughts, and incorporating this sacred technology into their own constructions. The fact that Grimskar used Black Templars wargear in his cybernetic reconstruction indicates that Orks had access to such materials, which means they were scavenging battlefields where Black Templars had fought. In the chaos of Armageddon's multiple war zones, with fighting stretching across continents and lasting for years, the possibility of Orks encountering dormant dreadnoughts becomes not just plausible, but likely. Earlier Black Templars campaigns against Orks provide additional context. The Ajaxian Crusade, for instance, was specifically launched against the Orks of the Broken Worlds consolidation. The Solemnus Crusade, mentioned earlier, was formed specifically to respond to Ork warlord Morkrul Grimskar's raising of a Black Templars chapter, Keep on the World of Solemnus. The Golgotha campaign saw Marshal Actoan leading Black Templars forces to eradicate Ork dominance of the Golgotha system. Each of these campaigns represents extended warfare against greenskin forces, often in environments where quick withdrawal or emergency evacuation might be necessary. The destruction of the chapter Keep on Solemnus particularly suggests circumstances where Black Templars were forced to abandon positions, possibly leaving behind valuable equipment, including dreadnoughts in their stasis chambers. Beyond Black Templars' specific operations, the broader history of Ork encounters with Space Marine dreadnoughts provides additional examples. The Goro campaign during the Great Crusade, where the Emperor and Horus personally led forces against an Ork empire dominated by highly advanced mech boys, saw intense fighting against Orks equipped with sophisticated weaponry and augmented with bionics. Some of these Orks were described as standing taller than dreadnoughts, suggesting they had encountered and possibly defeated such war machines in previous battles. Throughout the 10,000 years since the Horus Heresy, countless Space Marine chapters have fought countless Ork invasions across the galaxy. Not all battles end in clear Imperial victory. Not all equipment is recovered. The sheer scale of warfare in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, with millions of worlds and billions of combatants involved in endless conflict, ensures that losses occur, that valuable equipment is sometimes abandoned, that even sacred relics like dreadnoughts can be left behind in the chaos of war. Space hulks present another historical context for these encounters. These massive agglomerations of lost ships drifting through space, and the warp frequently contain Imperial vessels, including Space Marine craft. When such hulks emerge into real space and are boarded by scavenging Orks, the greenskins sometimes find dreadnoughts in the ship's armories or stasis chambers. These ancient warriors might have been sleeping for centuries or even millennia. Their ships lost in the warp, their chapters possibly destroyed or scattered. Historical records indicate that orcs regularly board and loot space hulks, viewing them as gifts from their gods Gork and Mork. The complex, labyrinthine interiors of these hulks mean that discovering a dreadnought in some forgotten chamber is entirely plausible. Whether such dreadnoughts still function after such extended isolation, whether their stasis systems have maintained the entombed warrior properly, whether activation is even possible, these questions vary case by case. But the potential exists, and with it, the possibility of the encounters we have been examining. The documented history of orc looting operations provides further evidence that these scenarios are not merely hypothetical. We know that orcs successfully steal and repurpose Imperial vehicles regularly. Looted Lehman Russ tanks, Rhino transports, and even larger vehicles are common sights in orc forces. The Death Skulls clan has gained particular notoriety for their ability to liberate enemy equipment, sometimes during active battles, and convert it to orc use with remarkable speed. If orcs can successfully loot and repurpose battle tanks and other vehicles, it is reasonable to assume they have encountered dreadnoughts as well. The difference is that dreadnoughts are both more valuable and more dangerous than standard vehicles. They cannot be easily repurposed for orc use because their control systems are integrated with the human occupant in ways that orc technology cannot replicate. But this does not stop orcs from trying, and their attempts create the scenarios we have been discussing. One final piece of historical context comes from the nature of Black Templars' organization. Unlike most Space Marine chapters, the Black Templars do not maintain a single fortress monastery or homeworld. They operate as a fleet-based chapter, their forces divided into numerous crusading fleets that roam the galaxy independently. This organizational structure means Black Templars' forces are sometimes isolated, operating far from support, relying on their own resources and the supplies they can gather or requisition. When a Black Templars' crusade force encounters difficulties, when they are forced to withdraw from a position or are defeated in battle, the support structure that other chapters can rely upon might not be immediately available. Recovery of lost equipment, including dreadnoughts, might be delayed or complicated by the fleet-based nature of their operations. This creates opportunities for enemies, including orcs, to scavenge what the Black Templars were forced to leave behind. All of this historical context establishes that encounters between orcs and Black Templars dreadnoughts, including scenarios where those dreadnoughts are found in stasis, are not just theoretical possibilities but likely occurrences given the scale and duration of the conflicts involved. The details might vary, the specific circumstances differ from case to case, but the fundamental situation, orcs discovering sleeping giants and learning too late what they have found, has probably played out dozens or even hundreds of times across the long history of the Imperium's wars. Theological and cultural implications. The encounter between orcs and a sleeping Black Templars dreadnought represents more than just a tactical situation or combat scenario. It embodies deeper themes about both factions, their values, their understanding of technology and warfare, and their place in the broader universe of Warhammer 40,000. For the Black Templars, a dreadnought represents the intersection of several core chapter beliefs. First is their absolute devotion to the Emperor, whom they worship as the God Emperor of mankind, rather than accepting the imperial truth that he was merely an exceptional man. This religious devotion colors every aspect of their existence, and nowhere is it more apparent than in their treatment of dreadnoughts. The ancient warriors interred within these machines are not just veterans or valuable military assets. They are holy relics, living saints, examples of devotion so pure that it transcends even death itself. The decision to enter a fallen warrior in a dreadnought rather than allowing them to die is framed as a sacred honor, an opportunity to continue serving the God Emperor beyond the normal span of life. The Black Templars see this as reward, proof of the warrior's worth, confirmation that their service has been so exemplary that they deserve to continue their crusade indefinitely. The rituals surrounding the interment process, the prayers spoken over the wounded warrior, the consecration of the machine that will become their new body, all of this reinforces the religious dimension of what is fundamentally a horrific process of binding human consciousness to mechanical form. The sleeping Dreadnought then becomes a shrine, a holy object that must be protected and revered. The chambers where they rest are not mere storage facilities, but consecrated spaces, decorated with religious iconography, maintained by serfs and tech marines who view their duties as sacred obligations. When circumstances force the abandonment of such a dreadnought, when the ancient warrior must be left behind due to tactical necessity, it is a tragedy for the chapter, a failure that weighs heavily on those who make the decision. Every effort will be made to recover the lost ancient, to return them to the chapter's embrace, to restore them to their rightful place among their brothers. From this perspective, Orks discovering and attempting to dismantle a Black Templar's dreadnought is not just destruction of valuable military equipment, it is desecration, violation of the sacred, an act so offensive that it demands the most extreme response. The rage that fills the awakening warrior is not merely anger at being disturbed or frustration at the tactical situation. It is religious fury, the wrath of a zealot who sees their very body, their sacred tomb, being defiled by Xenos filth unworthy to even look upon such holy machinery. This theological understanding also explains why a Black Templar's dreadnought, upon waking to find itself surrounded by Orks, does not calculate odds or consider retreat. The response is immediate and absolute violence, because anything less would be failure of faith. The God Emperor's champion does not withdraw from inferior Xenos. They do not negotiate or show mercy to enemies of mankind. They fight until victory is achieved, or until they are destroyed in the attempt. This is not tactical inflexibility. It is religious mandate, duty expressed through violence, faith made manifest in the form of assault, cannon fire, and crushing power fist blows. For the Orks, the encounter with a sleeping dreadnought reveals their fundamentally different worldview. Orks do not venerate technology in the way humans do. They do not see machines as sacred. They certainly do not understand the concept of a holy relic, or why humans would treat a war machine with religious reverence. To an Ork, a dreadnought is simply an impressive bit of technology, valuable because of what it can do or what it can be used for, but not special in any spiritual sense. This disconnect is what makes the encounter both tragic and darkly comic. The Orks have no idea they are committing an act of desecration. From their perspective, they have simply found good salvage, a valuable prize that any sensible greenskin would try to claim. The religious significance that the Black Templars attach to their dreadnoughts is completely invisible to the Orks, who lack the cultural context to even recognize that such significance exists. Similarly, Orks do not understand the concept of respect for the dead or reverence for ancestors. Ork society is aggressively present-focused, concerned with immediate challenges, current hierarchies, and the next battle. The fact that the dreadnought contains the remains of a warrior who has served for centuries, who has fought in battles the Orks cannot imagine, who represents a living connection to the chapter's history, all of this is meaningless to greenskins. They see metal, weapons, and armor, things to be looted, not a tomb to be respected. The Ork approach to technology also differs fundamentally from the human understanding, where the Adeptus Mechanicus sees each machine as hosting a machine spirit that must be placated through proper ritual, where Space Marine tech marines treat their equipment with careful maintenance and prayer. Orks simply hit things with wrenches and expect them to work. This crude, practical approach is often remarkably effective, at least for Ork technology, but it represents a completely different philosophy regarding the relationship between user and machine. When Orks encounter a dreadnought, they apply this same philosophy. It is a machine, therefore it can be fixed, modified, improved, or taken apart. The idea that the machine might resist, that it might have safeguards specifically designed to prevent unauthorized tampering, that disturbing it might trigger consequences. These considerations rarely occur to Orks because they contradict the Ork understanding of how technology works. To an Ork, machines exist to be used, and if a machine is not currently being used, then it is fair game for anyone who wants to claim it. This creates an interesting paradox. Orks are simultaneously more respectful and less respectful of technology than humans. They are more respectful in the sense that they see machines as inherently valuable and worthy of attention, worthy of being improved and modified, worthy of the mech boys' time and effort. They are less respectful in that they feel no need to follow proper procedures, to maintain original functionality, or to treat any particular machine as special beyond its immediate utility. The encounter also highlights different attitudes toward death and legacy. The Black Templar's warrior who accepts interment in a Dreadnought is choosing a form of immortality, a way to continue serving across centuries, to influence events long after they would have normally died. This choice reflects human understanding of legacy, the desire to be remembered, to have lasting impact, to transcend the limitations of mortal lifespan. Orks have no such concerns. An orc who dies in battle is simply dead, food for the scavengers, soon to be forgotten except perhaps as a name in a war story. Orks do not build monuments to the dead. They do not maintain ancestor worship or lengthy genealogies. Their focus is entirely on the present and immediate future. The biggest, strongest orc currently alive is the one who matters. Those who came before, no matter how impressive they were in their time, are simply gone. This fundamental difference in outlook makes the encounter between orcs and a Dreadnought almost inevitable. The humans seek to preserve their warriors indefinitely, binding consciousness to machine in defiance of natural death. The orcs see only salvage, opportunity, the next thing to be looted and repurposed. Neither side can truly understand the other's perspective, and that mutual incomprehension leads to violence when they meet. The broader implications extend to understanding these factions' places in the 40K universe. The Black Templars represent human civilization at its most zealous and uncompromising, willing to accept horrific costs in pursuit of their goals, viewing even death as negotiable if it means continuing to serve. The Dreadnought program epitomizes this attitude. We will not let you die because your work is not finished. Your service is too valuable. Your skills too refined. Never mind the psychological cost. Never mind the slow erosion of humanity. Never mind the isolation and the horror of existence as a consciousness trapped in metal. The crusade continues, and you will continue with it. Orks represent the opposite philosophy, not through deliberate choice, but through their fundamental nature. They live entirely in the moment, concerned with immediate pleasures, immediate challenges, immediate opportunities. They do not agonize over the cost of their choices because they barely consider consequences at all. They do not feel horror at what they are doing to the Dreadnought because they cannot comprehend why anyone would care. They simply take what they find, use what works, and move on to the next thing. The encounter between these philosophies, when it plays out in the discovery of a sleeping Dreadnought, becomes a microcosm of the broader conflict between order and chaos, between preservation and destruction, between reverence and pragmatism that defines so much of Warhammer 40,000. The Black Templars try to preserve their warriors indefinitely, to maintain continuity across millennia. The Orks tear everything apart, taking what they want, destroying what they cannot use, caring nothing for what came before. In the end, neither approach is presented as obviously correct. The Black Templars' devotion is admirable, but comes at terrible cost. The Orks' pragmatism is effective, but lacks any higher purpose. The universe of Warhammer 40,000 does not offer moral clarity or simple answers. It presents complex situations where all choices have consequences, where every faction's approach to existence is simultaneously impressive and horrifying. The sleeping Dreadnought, discovered by Orks, waking to fury and violence, represents all of this in concentrated form. It is sacred and profane, honorable and tragic, funny and terrifying, a perfect encapsulation of what makes this setting compelling. Conclusion. Lessons from the Sleeping Giant. As we come to the end of this exploration, we can reflect on what this scenario, Orks discovering and disturbing a sleeping Black Templars Dreadnought, tells us about Warhammer 40,000 and the factions that inhabit this grimdark universe. The most immediate lesson is perhaps the most obvious. Do not disturb sleeping Dreadnoughts. This is practical advice for anyone operating in the 40K universe, whether Ork or any other faction. These war machines are dangerous when active, and potentially even more dangerous when woken unexpectedly. The ancient warriors inside them have survived for decades or centuries by being exceptionally skilled at violence, and they do not respond well to being disturbed during their rest. Better to leave them alone, report their location to proper authorities if you are Imperial, flee the area if you are anyone else, and absolutely do not try to loot them for parts. But beyond this practical consideration lies deeper understanding. The scenario illustrates the fundamental alienness of different factions in 40K, how they operate from completely different assumptions about technology, warfare, religion, and existence itself. The Black Templars see a Dreadnought as a holy relic, a preserved champion, a sacred duty continuing beyond death. The Orks see salvage, useful bits, another example of Hume technology that could be repurposed. Neither view is objectively correct. Both are true within their respective contexts. The tragedy, such as it is, comes from these worldviews colliding. The encounter also demonstrates the principle that in Warhammer 40,000, curiosity or greed often leads to disaster. The Orks who discover the Dreadnought are motivated by entirely understandable desires. They want valuable salvage. They want to prove their worth by claiming impressive prizes. They want to enhance their equipment with looted technology. These are reasonable goals from an Ork perspective. But acting on these desires without proper understanding of what they have found leads directly to their deaths. The universe punishes the unwary, and knowledge gaps can be fatal. For the Black Templars, the scenario reinforces several chapter truths. First, their warriors serve beyond death, ready to fight again when called upon. Second, the Emperor protects, even in the form of automated awakening protocols and reinforced armor that preserves their ancients until they can fight again. Third, no Xeno should be suffered to live, particularly those foolish enough to lay hands upon holy machinery. The Dreadnought's awakening and subsequent slaughter of the Orks validates Black Templars' doctrine, proving that zealous fury and superior equipment can overcome numerical disadvantages. The scenario also speaks to the nature of warfare in the 40K setting. Battles are chaotic, equipment is lost, valuable assets are sometimes abandoned due to tactical necessity. The fog of war is thick, obscuring what has been taken, what has been destroyed, what remains behind. In this environment, unexpected encounters become inevitable. Orks will find things they do not understand. Ancient warriors will wake in circumstances far from ideal. Violence will result, because violence is the universal language of this universe, the only form of communication that transcends factional boundaries and ideological differences. There is dark humor here as well, the particular variety of comedy that only Warhammer 40,000 can provide. The image of Orks enthusiastically trying to dismantle a Dreadnought, completely oblivious to the danger, confident in their ability to loot anything. Then the sudden awakening, the realization of their mistake, the brief moment of "oh no" before the assault cannon opens fire. This sequence is simultaneously horrifying and funny. It is the cosmic joke of the setting. Everyone suffers, no one wins, and the best you can hope for is that your death will at least be entertaining for observers. The specific inclusion of the Black Templars in this scenario adds additional layers. Their extreme zealotry means the awakening warrior's response is not measured or proportional. There is no "stop what you are doing and step away from the Dreadnought." There is only immediate, overwhelming violence. This represents the Black Templars at their most characteristic, utterly uncompromising, furiously devoted, showing no mercy to those who have offended them. It is both their greatest strength, this absolute commitment, and their greatest weakness, this inability to moderate their response. From a storytelling perspective, scenarios like this are what make Warhammer 40,000 compelling. They are specific and detailed, yet allow for infinite variation. Every encounter between Orks and a sleeping Dreadnought will play out somewhat differently depending on which Orks are involved, which Dreadnought they have found, where and when the discovery occurs, what resources each side has available. Yet all these encounters share common elements: the contrast between Ork enthusiasm and the Dreadnought's fury, the disconnect in understanding between factions, the sudden transformation from what appeared to be a beneficial situation for the Orks into a nightmare. These scenarios also serve as entry points for deeper engagement with the lore. Someone intrigued by the concept of Orks finding a Dreadnought might investigate Black Templars' history, learn about their organization and beliefs, read about specific Dreadnoughts like Tancred or Gerald. They might explore Ork culture, learn about the Death Skulls and their looting traditions, understand how mech boys function. They might examine the broader Armageddon campaigns, the Space Hulk encounters, the countless other situations where these factions have clashed across 10,000 years of continuous warfare. The scenario functions as a gateway, a simple premise that opens into the vast, complex, and endlessly fascinating universe that Games Workshop has created and that countless authors, artists, and game designers have expanded upon. It demonstrates that even apparently simple situations in 40K are layered with meaning, rich with implications, connected to broader themes and larger narratives. Finally, the sleeping Dreadnought, discovered by Orks, reminds us of one of Warhammer 40,000's central truths. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Even in sleep, the Emperor's warriors remain ready for battle. Even while scavenging battlefields for salvage, Orks find new enemies to fight. There is no peace, no rest, no moment free from violence or the threat of violence. The Dreadnought sleeps, not because the war is over, but because there is temporary lull, a brief interval before the next battle. The Orks loot not because they have achieved victory, but because they are preparing for the next fight. Everyone in this universe is trapped in an endless cycle of warfare, and the best they can hope for is to fight well, to die bravely, and to be remembered fondly by those who come after. The Black Templars' Dreadnought achieves all of these through centuries of service in their metal tomb. The Orks achieve none of them, dying suddenly and brutally at the hands of an enemy they did not understand, their names forgotten immediately, their corpses looted by their own kind for whatever valuable bits they carried. Both outcomes are quintessentially 40K, noble and tragic for the Imperium, brutal and pointless for the Orks, satisfying for neither. This is the universe we love to explore, terrible and magnificent, horrifying and compelling, a setting where sleeping giants can be woken by curious scavengers, where ancient warriors fight endless wars across millennia, where even death is no escape from duty, where violence is the only constant, and mercy is weakness. It is not a universe anyone would want to live in, but it is endlessly fascinating to examine from the safety of our own reality. The Orks who find that sleeping Black Templars' Dreadnought learn this truth in the last moments of their lives, as assault cannon fire tears them apart, and the ancient warrior's fury washes over them like a cleansing flame. They learn that some things should not be disturbed, that curiosity has costs, that the universe is far more dangerous than even they, warriors born and bred, truly understand. And somewhere, in the depths of a fortress monastery, or aboard a fleet fortress, another Black Templars' Dreadnought sleeps, waiting for the call to battle, waiting for the moment when they will once again serve the God Emperor, waiting, perhaps, for the unfortunate greenskins who will find them and make the same mistake their predecessors made, waking something that should have been left alone. The cycle continues. The war continues. And in the sleeping chambers, the ancient ones dream their dreams of battle, eternal servants of an eternal crusade, ready to wake and kill at a moment's notice, forever and always, until death finally claims them or the universe itself ends. If you found this exploration fascinating, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into Warhammer 40,000 lore. There is always more to discover in the grim darkness of the far future. Always more stories to tell about the countless factions fighting their endless wars across a million worlds. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the 40K universe, even sleep offers no sanctuary.
I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys are sleepy. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to comment, give me feedback. And yeah, love you guys.